What are blessed Cartethia's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. For starters, Cartethyia is going to be our first ever dedicated Aero Erosion DPS. If you're interested in playing this negative status, then this blessed young elf is going to be the right lady for the job. She's able to apply a little bit of her own Aero Erosion, and is going to benefit greatly from Aero Erosion based supports. That means that supports such as Ciaccona are going to be absolutely excellent for boosting her damage output. And she's still on banners right now as we speak. Kuro Games is basically done with Spectral Frazzle. They've released every single key component that makes up that negative status. As we can see regarding Ciaccona's recent release and Cartethia's upcoming release, Aero Erosion is indeed the next on the chopping block. So if you want to invest into a strong new negative status archetype, then consider picking up Cartethyia. And here's the nice thing, we're going to be starting off Aero Erosion on a very high note, because not only is she going to be the best Aero Erosion DPS, but she's a freaking Sentinel Resonator at that, so she is going to be the de facto best in slot way to play the archetype. I highly doubt that Kuro Games is going to make another Aero Erosion DPS for a very long time, and if they do, then they're sure as heck not going to be power creeping Cartethyia easily. This means that she's a very safe investment to make if you're somebody that's interested in Aero Erosion. I don't believe that she's going to be quickly replaced. Also, she's quite novel, as we don't have access to any Aero Erosion DPSs in the game as of now. We're able to utilize it with Ciaccona, and you're able to pair her with Aero Rover and put her in a Gion team, but Gion himself has nothing to do with Aero Erosion. Cartethyia is going to be actually benefiting from it, and pulling for Ciaccona doesn't automatically mean that you get an Aero Erosion DPS. It's not a case where, like in Spectral Frazzle, you were able to pull for Phoebe, and then you would immediately have access to both a Spectral Frazzle DPS, while simultaneously obtaining the best install support for that respective negative status. To be honest, considering how valuable Phoebe is these days, perhaps Kuro Games just doesn't want to repeat their mistake twice of accidentally making one of the highest value units in the entire game. But anyways, that aside, the point that I'm trying to make here is that there's no other way to access a good Aero Erosion DPS. This doesn't only mean that the blessed divine elf is going to have great potential with Ciaccona, but it also means that she's really unique and interesting. Certainly a great way to separate her from the last Sentinel Resonator. Also, I think it's pretty clear that Cartethyia is going to become the brand new best Aero DPS. Now, honestly, I don't like to put too much emphasis on element, as I feel like that has very little bearing on a character's meta position, but if you're somebody that's interested in collecting the best DPS of each element, then it's highly likely that Cartethyia is going to become the brand new best Aero DPS. I mean, honestly, the fact that she's a Sentinel freaking Resonator with extremely bombastic animations should be more than enough of a reason to see why she's most likely going to become the brand new best Aero DPS. Now granted, I would like to emphasize, you don't need to upgrade to her if you already have a well-built Gion. Don't mistake her being good as a means for Gion to get worse. It doesn't work like that. He is still going to be a very, very strong and viable unit. But I do feel like it's likely that he's most likely going to get outclassed by Cartethyia in the Aero DPS department. The two can use completely different supports anyway, so they're very easily able to coexist on one account in terms of vigor management. But I still felt that was relevant to mention. Considering that Kuro has already released an amazing Aero Erosion unit that's perfect for supporting the negative status, I can only imagine how strong these two are going to be together. It should also be noted that Fleur-de-Lis is going to allow you to play DOT and Wuthering Waves in a sense. With Spectral Frazzle, the actual DOT of Spectral Frazzle meant very little for the team's overall damage output. It was usually a catalyst for a character to give themselves buffs or give themselves forte stacks, whereas with Aero Erosion, it actually does pretty good damage, especially with Ciaccona around. Fleur-de-Lis is really able to beef up the output of Aero Erosion, meaning that not only do you have Cartethyia herself dealing a lot of damage, but you have the DOT procs doing a lot of damage as well. So if you're a really big DOT fan, then perhaps you might want to consider Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis. Plus, if you consider the footage that Kuro Games has officially revealed, then it appears like Cartethyia is going to have excellent AoE. Keep in mind, this is a Sentinel Resonator being designed in a meta that has Whimpering Wastes. So I find it very likely that she's going to be able to dominate all endgame modes that exist in Wuthering Waves. Her attacks appear to be very bombastic with a very large range, so I have a hard time believing that she's going to be struggling with enemies that either move around a lot, or appear in large groups. So I find it highly likely that not only is she going to be good in endgame, but she is going to absolutely annihilate any form of it. I'm going to keep this pro brief, but I do still feel like it's worth mentioning. Cartethyia is a Sentinel Resonator. This is a special class of unit. The only other one that we have in the game right now is Jinshi, and when she came out, she was an absolute powerhouse. These units are considered special and are generally a cut above the rest. This unit is guaranteed to be good because she is a Sentinel Resonator. Granted, basically every limited 5-star Wuthering Waves right now is pretty good. Even the absolute worst ones still have a use case, and the absolute best ones are absolutely incredible. But I would like to emphasize how on launch, Sentinel Resonators are indeed given special treatment. And consider how after Jinshi's lifespan, she continuously got brand new second slot teammates over and over again. Cantarella, Brandt, Jojo shortly after her release, you get the idea. Granted, Cartethyia is going to be more restrictive because she's tied to negative statuses, and we'll talk about that more a little later. I'm not saying that you should get her over future prospects. What I am saying is that on her launch, she is most likely going to be a very powerful DPS, if not the strongest DPS in the game due to being a Sentinel Resonator. Of course, we'll have to wait and see whether that's true or not, but it was true for Jinchi when she came out, so I thought I would provide that heads up. As glorious as our blessed divine elf is, we should definitely still discuss her flaws. One of them being what I mentioned earlier, she's gonna be a little restrictive in terms of team building. This is because she is based around a negative status, and negative status characters have a very strict team building core. They always rely on having another character that's able to consistently apply the negative status that they want on the enemy. Or in some cases, like Zani, just having it applied once throughout the entire rotation. This means that she's not really going to be passively gaining new teammates over time in the same way that Jinchi did, because in order for Cartethyia to gain a brand new, very strong synergy, that character is going to have to be focused around Aero Erosion and be able to fit within that team archetype. And because we just got Ciaccona, the premium best in slot unit for this negative status, I don't think that Kuro is going to go out of their way to make a brand new Aero Erosion support. Maybe a 4-star one, but I doubt it. So unfortunately, Sentinel Resonator doesn't exactly mean that they're automatically going to be a very flexible unit. That was very much just a Jinchi thing, and that leads me into my next point. She's really gonna want Ciaccona. Now, there is a chance that her power baseline will be high enough to the point where not having Ciaccona is not going to be as detrimental as not having somebody like Phoebe for Zani. Because after all, Ciaccona is the Sentinel Resonator. However, with that being said, she's still tied to the negative status archetype. And not having your dedicated support for your respective negative status, yeah, it's rough. I think it's highly likely that we're going to see a similar case to Phoebe and Zani, where the unit might be usable at a free-to-play level, sure, but goodness me, they are so much better with their paid premium option. I generally don't mind premium options being best in slot, that is how it's always going to be, but my issue is that we don't really have a good 4-star Aero Erosion applicator. There's no alternative. With Spectral Frazzle, you would have used Rover. But while Aero Rover is indeed a good unit for the archetype, he doesn't apply Aero Erosion. That's not his gimmick. So you're kind of left with either having to pull Ciaccona if you want your Cartethyia to perform at her fullest, or you can just massively tank your damage by pulling for Cartethyia without the Bard. It's an unfortunate byproduct of a negative status team structure, and in fact, I feel like I'm starting to see a pattern here. If you want to invest into a negative status DPS, you should have enough saved to not only pull the DPS, but also whoever their respective support is, because they're going to lose a lot of performance without them. Now granted, Cartethyia could come out, and this is not going to be a problem at all. But considering that we've already seen this timeline play out with Zani, I felt like it was indeed important to mention. Then as for this last flaw, it's honestly not really that big of a deal, but it's still a minor inconvenience, so I'll mention it anyway. Fleur-de-Lis is able to buff up Aero Erosion, and when it stacks up very high, that's going to deal quite a lot of damage. So if you end up taking out those enemy waves, then you're going to have to apply Aero Erosion again. Not a big deal, right? After all, Cartethyia applies some Aero Erosion herself, and the Bard is able to do so in Multiwave. So what's the issue here? Well, it's not really an issue, especially because most of the time if you're facing Multiwave, it's going to be in Whimpering Wastes, and this just really doesn't matter in a mode about trash mobs. But Fleur-de-Lis's finisher does more damage, the more Aero Erosion there is on the enemy. So in TOA, if you end up finishing up an enemy wave, and then you move on to the next one and do her sword finisher, if there's not as many stacks on the new enemy, well then you're just not going to be making the most out of your final sword slash. But like I said, this is really a minor inconvenience, and I honestly wouldn't let this be the deal breaker. I would rather consider how expensive she is. That is the make it or break it in my opinion. Granted, free-to-play Cartethyia could be better than I'm expecting, we have to wait and see at the end of the day, but it's undeniable that she probably is going to fall off of a cliff without Ciaccona. I suppose what will really matter is seeing how good her alternatives are, and seeing if she's going to be good outside of her buff shield period, because whenever she comes out, it's very likely that she's going to feel good in all endgame, because endgame is going to cater to her specifically. So this is partially a time will tell situation, but I don't think it's rocket science. If you want your Sentinel Resonator of Renesita to perform at her fullest, then it's highly likely that you're gonna want the Bard. Cartethyia looks extremely fun, extremely unique, and I love that we can play as Fleur-de-Lis as well. Generally, I'm very happy with her kit, but I do hope that down the line, we're able to get some more accessible options for her, because as it currently stands, she does feel a tad restrictive. But with that being said, I'm indeed looking forward to this divine maiden. How about yourself? Are you excited for Fleur-de-Lis and Cartethyia? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week, every week on Saturdays, start from 3 PM UK time. Come along so we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to tell you Cartethia's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and if you think about it, you technically get double value for your astrites, because you get 2 waifus with 1 5-star pull. I think that's pretty neat.